Hello and welcome to On Landscape Any Questions. I'm here with my co-host Joe Cornish and myself, Tim Parkin, with our guest Rachael Talibart. Hello, Rachael.
Hello. Hi, Tim and Joe. Thank you very much for inviting me.
No
Great to
problem
see
at
you.
all. For the benefit of people who may not know your work, could you give us a short summary of who you are, photography related?
I'm a specialist in coastal photography, so the sea and the coast it carves. And I've been full-time pro for 9 years now, and I'm obsessed with the sea. I think that basically covers it.
Yes. Yeah. I was actually reminding myself of your portfolio earlier today. And I was particularly pleased to see the Tracy's portfolio, which is lots of interesting extra things. Because I'd seen the Ghost in the Shell, which is non-wave photography. I think a lot of people will know you for the Waves Sirens project, but with the shells and also Tracy's, which is, how would you describe Tracy's? Textures.
Yeah. And that's actually much of that portfolio predates the wave stuff, actually.
Okay.
So,
That is interesting. Also, I wanted to ask Rachael, Tim, before we actually got several interesting questions from On Landscape contributors and readers. And but before we get into them, Rachael, your work, or you say you've been pro for 9 years, but your work is really artistic, and I'm just intrigued to know, before your previous career, which you might want to mention, whether what your artistic background is, because it's I always think that childhood and what happened then is usually pretty important for what happens in adult life. So be fascinated to hear.
Well, I as a child, I was certainly no artist. I think I scraped a B in O-level art. And I think the teacher thought I was lucky to get that. But I was a writer, actually. I thought I was going to be a novelist.
Oh.
And then I took a strange, dark turn towards the legal profession for many years and stopped writing. But I have had published a short science fiction. I used to write science fiction.
That's really interesting.
Years ago.
Wow.
And that's what I thought I'd end up doing. And after I finished the legal profession, I did actually go back to university and studied English literature. And as part of that, some history of art. And then I did a master's in Victorian literature and art just before I started to devote myself to photography about 10 years ago. So there's that, definitely. But I think probably I was more influenced by my mum, who definitely was the artistic one in the house. And she was a true romantic at heart. I mean, with a big R, like, Shelley, Keats, all that. And romantic art as well. She liked the gothic and moody, slightly scary, the sublime. So I think you can see the influence coming through there. And I was very close to my mother, so I think that must have really influenced me.
I'm going to take a sidetrack because I'm a science fiction fan of various genres. What sort of genre of science fiction was it? What did you write? Because it covers quite a few bases.
It was sort of more realistic, near future sci-fi. So the short story, I don't want anyone to look for it. Fortunately, names be able to find it because it's dreadful, I'm sure.
Parable of the Sower type things, is it?
A post-apocalyptic near future where it just tells the story of a schoolgirl walking to school through a very different world. And you just sort of, as the story goes on, it starts off quite normally with a kid going to school, and then the descriptions start to reveal that the world is very different from what we know.
I think having just read Parable of the Sower, I think I can relate to that.
I hope it wasn't prescient.
No, Parable of the Sower is still science fiction, but it's about the near post-apocalyptic America breaking down.
Was prescient.
Yeah.
I think it's the theme.
Yeah. So why picking up the camera? Was that
my dad was the...
Okay.
Yeah, a keen amateur. He used to subject us to slideshows. And it was subject University, and my brother and I would just sigh. We'd rather watch stars. We had to sit and watch Dad's slides, but we were very well behaved and we did it.
So did you, because you mentioned in one of your interviews coming back with bags and bags of exposed film, presumably 35 mil.
As a young adult, I was a keen hobbyist, and I used to travel a lot because I had a very challenging job, very challenging career that didn't give me much free time, but I used the holidays. It did pay well. So when the holidays came along, I was able to afford to go an adventure, and I took a 35 millimeter camera with me and just took far too many photographs. I mean, honestly, my honeymoon, we went to Zimbabwe. So safari, you do take a lot of photos on safari. We were away for 3 weeks and I brought back 52 exposed rolls of film. The developing, it was colour. I did, so I sent them off to be developed. And I still haven't told my husband how much that cost. 32 years later.
Was that were you still having slideshows as well at home?
No. By now I had moved out of the family home and was living with my fiance and indeed husband.
So did any of those pictures survive into your Tracy's portfolio? No.
No, they're dreadful. They are awful pictures, but they record what I saw at the time, and they're a good memory. Photography's great for that, isn't it?
It is. I should probably move on to the questions because we could ask, unless you've got anything else to ask, Joe. No, we can add some more later.
No, absolutely, yeah. Go ahead.
Yes, Madeline Lenar. Do you know Madeline?
Yes. She's got a lovely, lovely book.
Yes. She says, I've been following Rachel's work for quite a few years and enjoyed meeting up with her at last year's GDC. I would love to hear a comment on the following question. How do you see your work evolving at the moment? What trends have you noticed? And what avenues are you eager to explore?
I'm obsessed at the minute with water crashing into rocks, using the longest focal lengths I can, fast and slow shutter, but no slower than a quarter of a second because I don't want to smooth it out. And honestly, that is probably not going to interest anyone else because there's quite a lot of repetition, but it's not boring me. So I'm just doing it. And I'm loving it, actually, really loving it.
I must say that's really fascinating because I can see the appeal of that as well. Although I wouldn't necessarily have it as my only subject, but although you say there's repetition, which absolutely there is, at the same time, it's every moment's unique. There's never a moment where something repeats itself exactly. So in that sense, each time you open the shutter and make an exposure, you're creating something that's unique potentially. And all that energy is highly unpredictable. And that unpredictability is what makes it to my mind, such an appealing subject.
Well, I'm glad you get it. Yeah, I mean, totally. I've just come back from on Monday night from Nazaré, where I go quite a lot because we have a second home there. And I was ignoring the big waves, even though it was a big wave day and the surfers were out there. And I was just photographing sea foam being flung against rocks. And I had the best time, absolutely the best time. And, everyone else thinks I'm mad. I heard someone talk. There were some people behind me at one point. I think it was a workshop group, but I didn't recognize them. And I stayed incognito with my hood. And I heard the guy saying, I don't know what that woman in front is photographing all the time. It's nothing. I thought,
little do they know.
Little do they know. But the pictures might not be that great. They seriously might not be, but I had the best time.
Well, I've just been reading about the way that Facebook and the like social media channels try and make things addictive to try and get people to engage more with it. And part of that is the unknown of what you might get every time you click on the next article or scroll down to the next thing. Do you think there's that little bit of addiction in the work there where you go, another one, we'll see what that one comes out like. Oh, if I could get that one again.
Yeah, totally. And, I'm doing stupid things. Like it's windy and I've got a 400 millimeter lens on a tripod trying to, at full reach, trying to do a quarter of a second. And 80% of those pictures, the rocks need to be sharp, by the way. In 80% of the pictures, they won't be because it's wobbled. But in 20%, they're sharp, and I had fun. So it's all good.
So even when you get a good photograph composition and waves and stuff, you like crossing your fingers that it's sharp as well.
Yeah.
It's funny what you're saying about being incognito, because I'm on a small WhatsApp group with Mark Littlejohn, and he sent a picture of you, Rachel, recently. Yeah, it's Hebrides, and there's no way you could have known who it was, but he knew it was you. But there you were in the middle of a storm, out on the middle of some beach, and it was the sand whipping around you, and there were, and it was very silhouetted. It was rather a good picture. Typical Mark. He can take a good picture with, anything with a phone. So I thought, well, it was credit to your dedication to your art, that's for sure.
Well, that was funny. Mark actually made a video of me on that beach in that squall. And by the way, Mark was being a true gentleman. He had a one-to-one client with him. And it was a wicked storm. You know how they can happen on Harris, but this was one of the strongest. I've been to Harris a lot, one of the strongest I've ever experienced. Lasted 10 minutes, but it was wicked. Mark was literally made himself into a human shield for his client. He's such a gentleman. But anyway, he took this video of me and then he put it on social media. And some of the comments we got, like someone said, she's still using her camera. Doesn't she know that it will be ruined? And all this stuff was going on. Now, the camera was just fine. And I kept rolling and I took some video myself and I really like it. So there.
Well, I've actually got a question from Mark Littlejohn.
Really?
Just chatting with him, and he says that he wanted to know how you quantify success. I would say a man of few words, but that's not really true with Mark.
That wouldn't be true. No?
That's actually quite a good question. Mark's a nice guy. I like him. Don't tell him I said that. That'd go to his head. Anyway, how do I quantify success? Well, I have to caveat this with that I'm no longer a spring chicken and I am financially stable, thanks to the previous miserable but well lucrative career. And the fact that my lovely husband stayed in that miserable but lucrative career. So, I do quite well with my photography. It pays quite a lot of bills. It saw my daughter through college in the USA, stuff like that. So it's doing all right. But I am in the luxurious position, the privileged position that I can say, hand on heart, that for me, success is feeling fulfilled by the work that I make. And that happens when I create work and it comes off the printer and I print it and I stick it on the wall. That's the moment of success for me. If that picture makes me feel that wonderful rush of, I love it, that's success for me. Whether it's going to be well received afterwards, whether it's going to, the edition will sell out or it will linger, never selling a single print, that's not part of the definition of success for me. But I am ready to acknowledge that I'm in a privileged position to be able to say that. But that is the truth.
I think that's very honest, and it's helpful to have that background, I'm sure, for anybody who is wondering, because I do hear what you're saying and agree to a large extent. If you are somewhat free, at least, of financial pressures, you then are able to pursue what drives you, what's in your heart and soul, rather than what's going to necessarily put food on the table. So, yeah, and it's actually fascinating. I just come back from London and had went to a couple of art shows, as you do, and reading the background of artists especially from the last century and the one before, how while many of them have a very left wing or left of center view of the world, very revolutionary, often, kind of perspective. They're almost all from privileged backgrounds, and not necessarily born with, from a high status, but from the very least sort of middle class and able to pursue what they wanted to do without that pressure. So, I think it's worth saying that is a privilege, and it's hard to get to that position for many. and we should be mindful of that. But of course, I think it's true that from a truly creative standpoint, if you make work without too much pressure, it helps you to pursue what really, really is deep inside you, and that's a big advantage.
I think it is too. And I do feel very lucky to be in that position. I think I still want my businesses to be successful because there's a feeling of fulfillment that comes from that and pride, and they do very well. So I feel very lucky and proud of those businesses. But the danger is that if you chase that too much, it can stop you. And I think I will be honest and admit, because what's the point in me talking if I'm not honest, that I have come close to making that mistake. And in fact, my clients know this already, I'm taking 7 months off from the workshops business. The first half of next year, I won't be doing any teaching, no talks, no teaching, not any online stuff. I'm just stopping that business. It's going on hiatus for 7 months so that I have time to get back to creating, because I don't carry a camera when I teach, and I do a lot of workshops and I enjoy them. So I'm not abandoning that business, but it's done so well that it's dragged me away from making new work for myself. And I think I need to get back to that. So I've made that decision.
Sabbatical. We all need one.
Yeah. You keep saying you're going to have a sabbatical, don't you, Joe?
Well, I mean, in a way, my whole life is a sabbatical, Tim.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. I feel like that when you're talking about us moving up to Scotland, we keep on saying we should retire. And so we sort of have retired in a way, but there you go. Retiring is just doing what you want to do mostly.
Exactly. Yeah. So more questions from
More questions. Okay. We're going to have a question from John Hedges. You've printed a few books, or had printed for you. Do you have any suggestions on how to make sure you produce something that is going to be both successful and also personally satisfying?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay. Now I need to be careful here and tactful. But I've had 4 books so far. There's probably 2 more in me, I think, but we'll see. And the 4th one is the first one that I have been really, really proud of. Now, that's awful to say because lots of people bought this, and I feel really, really bad to say that. But the first 3 were published, and the 4th was effectively self-published. It's a sort of quasi-self-publishing model. I worked with Eddie Ephraim's. And the reason I did the 4th was because of dissatisfactions that I'd experienced with the first 3, where I felt that too often we compromised for the commercial demands of the project, and that actually that went too far on each occasion. And
was that through image choice, or was it through material, printing substrates and
finish? The latter, the printing itself and the materials and the format of the book. So what I really wanted to do was I wanted to make a book where, as far as is possible, I have to be a bit realistic. This is litho printing. It's not fine art printing. But as far as possible, to have every picture as good as the limited edition prints that people would be buying of those pictures as well. And so I went to Eddie and I said, right, Eddie, I want to do this ridiculous project, and you're the only person I could think of who might be just about willing to participate in this project. And I'm going to say yes to every question that involves me spending more money.
Lucky him.
Well, yeah, not quite that much, but, came to the actual format of the book, the size, the paper, how it was going to be printed. And it was financially, it was completely mad. It still is completely mad.
I'd have been impressed with that, because Eddie, a lot of his short run books are done with digital printing, still CMYK, but he does some litho for larger runs, and I presume also he does some inkjet where you combine the inkjets together. What was the book done? What process was used for yours?
We used litho.
Yeah.
And we went to EBS in Verona, who were brilliant, by the way. It would be really hard for me to
see
a
what they're
book
doing.
print and else now. They're so good, and they were lovely. and really professional and just invested in it being the best it could be, which was lovely. And I went on press, which is the first time I've been able to do that. And I really enjoyed that experience. Yes, so we went litho. The book is physically, the outside dimensions are big. It's bigger than A3. There are only, I can't remember the number of pages. It's not an enormous number of pages. It's more about, because it's sirens, I think there's a danger that it becomes repetitive with such a tight project if you have too many pictures. So I can't remember how many pictures there are in there now, but
it was 40 plates. I remember reading about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Really big format book, but litho printed, here's the craziness. So in total, including the special edition, we printed fewer than 200. So of course it makes no financial sense whatsoever. And and it was only to be sold through the galleries that represent me. So it's priced for that. So limited edition, sold through galleries who take their commission, which I don't begrudge them, by the way. And it was an insane project. But at the end of it, I finally have a book of which I'm truly proud. And it was worth it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Sorry, especially if you don't lose money. I mean, I would say that... I
lost money.
Well, fair enough. Much, I suppose. But that's a wonderful feeling. And by the way, I lose money on most of the books I do as well. But it's the most important thing is to feel that you've left something that is as you say, that you're proud of. I think that's admirable. Brilliant.
Well, thank you. And I may never do another book. And if I don't, well, this one's a good one to end on.
If we add up all the costs of everything we do, spending on photography through travel and everything else, it's probably a small percentage of that at the end of the day to come out with something that is your life's work recorded. So making money on it isn't the most important thing.
And working with Eddie is great. He's a dear friend of mine, and we've done so many projects together. We always learn stuff doing things with him, if only because he loves to reinvent the wheel each time. And that does force you to actually consider, from the foundation of the concept upwards, rather than just taking a predetermined approach. And that's obviously, you've enjoyed that. And that's absolutely
I really did. Yeah, I got on very well with Eddie, and he came on press with me and was so, so helpful, invaluable, actually.
Did you have to remake any plates on press?
No.
Excellent.
No, it all went very smoothly. The best thing was the duotones for the black and white. They have a guy at EBS, and he is so good at that.
Yeah,
and when we arrived, when we arrived, the first thing almost I had to do was go and sit next to him, and he took me through all the duotones, making sure that I was happy. And I remember at one point I was saying, "Yeah, it looks great," and he was saying, "It is your work. Be sure." He didn't want me to just,
Fantastic.
He didn't want me to be pragmatic. He wanted me to be pernickety, and I loved that.
Excellent. My colleague Matt has asked a question. He says, you're very well known for your images of waves that resemble sea creatures, sirens. I imagine having captured that niche has been good for your photography career. However, I'm curious if you've ever felt like it has limited you in terms of wanting to creatively pursue other types of images that might not fit in with the area, for instance, the ghost and the shell traces. Do you ever feel that may overshadow the other works? I know the press are very attracted to that side of things.
Yeah, no.
No.
The thing is, you have to keep moving on. You can't just keep, I don't want to be one of those, pot boiler novelists who just, hit on a formula and just keep bashing it out. And these days you can't do that in photography anyway, because as soon as you hit upon a new thing, you will be copied endlessly, and by people who are pretty good. They're capable of copying your work and making it look like your work. And there are many, many, many people doing that. Many, many people photographing their own sirens. I've given lots of talks as well, so it's not like I've hidden how I did it. And they know where to go and when to go there, because I can't teach and hold back, can you? So I'm very generous with all of that. And yeah, I mean, I've even recently, a client, I won't say who, did well in a competition with a wave made at New Haven that looks like mine, and he actually called it Medusa.
Oh,
So they're even nicking my mythological. Yeah. So the only answer to that is to move on, is to innovate. There's nothing you could do about it. So there's no point in losing sleep over it. You know, you might acknowledge to yourself that you're slightly miffed every now and then just move on and make new work and keep innovating.
Does your gallery curse you and say, can we have some more?
Yeah, so I work with 4 galleries, and one of the galleries, 2 of them only want sirens. But there are enough left. That's fine. Okay. The gallery in America started with sirens, but has now moved much broader, and they're selling a lot of other things from my portfolio. And then the 4th gallery don't want any sirens at all.
That's interesting. Excellent.
So actually, it's okay.
That's really good. Yeah.
It is good. That's surprising, actually, that they have got an open mind about it. But that's good. I mean, it's proof that they recognize your talent and it's not just about one thing. But it's great, I think, to have that range. I mean, I totally empathize with the position that you find yourself in. And of course, there's always, think of Michael Kenner, who's been very, very widely copied. But, the fact is that even Michael wasn't the first to do the sort of thing that he's well known for. We all have antecedents or precedents or whatever the right term is. So it's almost impossible to do something original, and you can't own anything in the creative world. I think what you can do is be yourself and try to at least own your own work. And the authenticity of that is what people recognize and on some level. I mean, it's what gives you that longevity, I think.
I think you're right. And I think that was really well put. And I think also it's quite good to be reminded every now and then that you do stand on the shoulders of giants, no matter what. And I've forgotten the name of the photographer now, which is really annoying. I have to try and find it. But a while ago, a client or someone online sent to me a link. They'd found a photograph that was taken in the 1920s. And I think it was in a Scandinavian country. And it's a fast shutter photograph of a clapotic wave. It looks like one of my sirens. And somebody did that with the technology they had in the 1920s. I was properly humbled by that, and it's no bad thing.
I've got another question about the sirens. Actually, it's because this comes from the point of view of the pareidolia and seeing faces, etc., in pictures, and there's obviously a positive in that because it's worked very well for the series. Do you ever feel that can get in the way? Because I know sometimes my mum can see faces in so many different things, and sometimes I show her a picture and she's, oh, look, I can see pictures in there. I'm like, look at the picture. I don't need to see the face. Do you ever feel it can get in the way of like appreciating the actual picture as an abstract in itself?
Yes, it absolutely can. There's nothing more irritating is then someone saying, look at that bunny rabbit. Serious work of art. Definitely, it can be annoying. I mean, when it's part of the project, obviously you're inviting people to do that. And I think you can frame your work in such a way as you encourage people to do that if it's part of the point of the work. I've got a photograph that's not a siren, but it's a picture of just rocks. And there's a little whitish triangular rock in the foreground in front of a sort of narrow sea cave that's curving behind it and some dark rocks around. And there are so many faces in those rocks. And I've called it faces because I actually want people to see them, because it feels like the little rock, which I don't think has a face, it's being surveilled or looked down on paternalistically, depending on how you're feeling at the time, by all these dark rocks around it. And so I've invited people to engage by calling it faces. But with some of my more abstract pictures, like the ones in Traces, I might be less keen on people finding bunny rabbits and dogs in there. So I try and use titles in a way that will encourage people to to go in a direction that I like. But I think we all have to acknowledge that once the artwork's out there, we lose control of it. And we just got to embrace that. I mean, it's good in a way if people are interpreting your work, isn't it?
Mm. There's a very funny, I don't know if you remember this, but there's a very funny Charlie Brown cartoon from many years ago, actually now, where Charlie Brown and Lucy and their friend Linus, I think it is, who's the clever one who plays Beethoven, are lying on the ground on a sunny day looking up at the clouds. And I think Linus says, "What can you see in the sky? I can see a Renaissance painting with, and with a lot of action, and describe something like something out of a Leonardo or Perugino or something." And then Lucy says, "Oh, I can see a city with shapes and so on and so on. What can you see, Charlie?" And Charlie said, "Well, I was going to say I saw a ducky, but I changed my mind." So it's this kind of, it was just lovely. Just the fact that it was so, everybody can see something, but most people don't see anything that sophisticated, but we do see something different. And I think pareidolia is just part of human nature. In fact, I suspect it's part of evolutionary biology, isn't it?
So,
I think it is.
So anyway, I think that's a wise way of putting it. If you want to manage the interpretation a bit, title it accordingly, and if you don't. Yeah,
I think
out
so.
of interest, when you were working on the sirens, did you ever think about it as portrait photography?
Yes, a lot. I mean, the way the waves have pronouns, Medusa is a she. And if I talk about the photograph, I don't say it when I talk about the wave, I say she.
Yes.
Yeah, they're portraits.
And for the rest of the picture, you think about that's the context, the studio for the portrait.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in fact, I was at a photography show yesterday talking about context in landscape photography and how I like to excise it quite a lot, if not entirely. And one of the things I said was that for sirens, I wanted a plain sky. I didn't want a spectacular sky. I mean, it would have been a massive distraction, but also I didn't say this at the photography show. I just said it'd be a distraction, but actually you've made me think also, I think I would say that it wouldn't be a portrait then, you'd expect a plain backdrop for a portrait. And they're portraits. They are very wise.
I think it's really interesting how the literary associations that you bring in from your, personal and familial kind of connection with, with romantic literature and so on. I mean, certainly classical mythology. I just think that's great. And obviously it gave you a direction, I would imagine. And certainly the emotion in the images, the drama and the power of them. And even just, we come back to the photographic techniques that you use, the way that you frame, obviously principally the way they're framed, but then also the way that they're rendered in terms of tone and the mood and so on. All of that is influenced by the fact that you want to create that deep emotional kind of, it is dramatic, theatrical. There's a number of ways it could be described, but the fact that you have that desire to bring a new life in a way to the subject matter, I think is great. And it's lovely to hear what some of the backdrop to that is, I must say.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I think you pour your soul, don't you, into your photographs? And
hopefully so.
Yeah, I certainly did pour mine into sirens.
You, I heard you. I was lucky enough to hear you talk a year and a half ago, Rachael. It was, I think you might have even told us, or I might have asked, I forget now. But the way that the sirens were shot and the location, as you said, you were very generous of it, telling us everything about it. And I think you were literally there. You knew about the storm coming, and you were there all day. I was thinking, absolutely down on your chest, getting soaked to the skin. And you barely even noticed how cold and damp and probably horrible it was because you were so preoccupied. And I thought, well, that is a proper photographer or artist. depending on your interpretation. But just to be able to do that, it's amazing. It's like having almost an out-of-body experience, really.
I think that's exactly what it's like, actually. But I mean, we're certifiable, really, aren't we?
I did have a tongue-in-cheek question from somebody called Joseph Turner, who said, have you ever felt the urge to tie yourself to the mast of a ship during a storm?
Yeah, there's serious doubt that he ever actually did that. I think that was an early form of advertising push. That was
good PR.
But, yeah, very good PR. No, I would be so seasick. I would be horribly ill, and I wouldn't be able to do anything. So no.
Are you still seasick? Sorry.
That picture, which I'm sure almost everyone watching this or listening to can visualize, of storm at sea, is a great advert for intentional camera movement. So, saying,
Absolutely.
But it's a brilliant photo, brilliant painting.
Yeah, it is. I love it.
I have a question about your releasing work. People have different ideas about how to release work, and some people will apologize if they haven't posted something on a particular day because they've let their reviewers down. And I think you post or release a few less than daily. And do you ever feel the urge to share more, or is that do you have your own little set of people you share with, or is it very much restricted to these are my releases?
I think it's changed over time. I mean, I'm teetering on the brink of just dropping social media altogether. I just think it's awful. And it's got worse and worse and worse. And the trouble is it can suck you in. So you feel like you start to behave like it's your job to feed the social media, and that, that's all that you're about. And that's ridiculous, isn't it? Because I mean, all right, I can't deny that it can be useful. It was more useful in the past, I think, for photographers. One of the galleries, the gallery that sells the most work, the American one, I think found me on Instagram. So, there are practical uses for it, but they have reduced over time. For me, the algorithm changed against me in February 2021. I mean, I knew the day the algorithm had changed, everything changed.
Yeah.
And even that sentence alone tells you how stupid this is. That there's a computer algorithm just one day says, "Oh, actually, you're not going to be popular anymore."
Yeah, it's sad that it's not just how many people like your work or share it. It's down to how they want to control it.
Well, exactly, and you can get sucked into thinking someone's must be good because they've got a lot of followers on Instagram, which is ridiculous. And well, I have a lot of clients that I mentor or I do projects with over a long time. And one of the things I make them all do is review the websites of photographers that I think will be interesting and inspiring for them. Many of those photographers who are doing great work are well represented by galleries. In some cases, they have prints in national collections, in the Smithsonian, in the V&A, are not on social media at all. You can actually end up corrupting your idea of what's a great piece of art, because if all you see are people on social media because they're popular, you're closing yourself off to some of the best photographic art out there, and you're corrupting your own inner library of inspiration. So I really am close to just dropping the whole lot. I just don't know if all of my galleries will be pleased with me. I do really owe them.
I think it's probably attitude towards it that needs changing potentially rather than dropping it. Because like you say, it's a tool and you just need to control the tool and not let the tool control you.
Yeah, exactly right. But I'm not sure how good I am at that.
Not many people are good at it, yeah.
No, I don't share every day. In fact, I share less and less often on Instagram because I also, are we allowed to get a tiny bit political?
Yeah.
Tiny bit. Probably guess most
Absolutely,
photographers
yeah.
I'm not right wing, and I am horrified by the direction that Meta has taken. So now I feel philosophically inclined to drop them as well. So I have recently started an account on Blue Sky, which is
Seems more ethical, potentially.
More ethical at the moment. We'll see. Things change.
Google was ethical at one point, though, there.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see. I don't know, but I used to play the game and find it fulfilling on some level. That is no longer the case.
I had a great quote off a friend of mine who was a fine art degree. One of his lecturers said to him, if everybody likes your work, you're doing something seriously wrong. And I thought that was a phrase to live by.
Yes. Exactly right. I agree with that. Well, you're making vanilla art, aren't you?
Yeah. I mean, I did this when we started off with On Landscape magazine. I purposely never look at statistics. I don't care how many people read the articles. I'll edit things to make it something I'm interested in. And then if people like it or don't like it, I'm never going to be as popular as an Elements magazine or something like that. It's a niche audience that does a certain thing and does it the way I want it done. If it does it well, that's great. But I think you have to do that with your work or your art or what you're interested in.
I think that's lovely. Words to live by.
Yeah. Music to my ears, I must say, from both of you there. Just, but especially as I did 6 months of social media about 100 years ago, and I was depressed by the end of it. So I asked my son to remove me from social media, although there still seems to be a kind of ghost in the machine somewhere.
I like the idea of a ghost Joe Cornish in the internet somewhere, just flying around.
Anyway, I mean, I think, Rachael, in your case, surely you have the profile that you need. And it was interesting what you were saying, that many of the photographers and artists you admire have no social media presence. And that's my view as well. So I think that speaks volumes, really. Social media is there. There's nothing you can do about it. So, but the number of photographers I know who described it to me as like a monster that you have to feed constantly. And that I just why do you want that dominating your life? I think that's something to step away from if possible. And I think the fact that it can contaminate the direction of your work is the biggest potential problem.
Yeah, definitely.
I agree.
And questions, Tim?
Yeah,
Mark?
I do have another question. I believe you travel to Oregon every year, or it did say in an article I read somewhere. How does the Pacific compare to the Atlantic?
Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. I don't go every year. I did for a while. I'm trying to curtail my long haul traveling. I will, however, go there for the first time in 5 years, I think, this autumn, because my daughter lives on the west coast now of the USA. So I feel that visiting family is something I can not feel guilty about, even though the carbon foot flying that far is quite a lot. I'm not going to not see my daughter, so I will visit her and then go up to Oregon. You know what? It's a bit like Cornwall, and it's a little bit like Iceland, but only bigger. Yeah. The beaches are huge. I mean, Cornwall has, I was just there last month, has some epic beaches, but in Oregon, they're immense. It's less busy. You can have an immense beach almost to yourself, especially if you're willing to do the morning, because it's west facing. Everyone goes for sunset, but sunrise, or actually I'm more interested in dawn, is such a beautiful time to be out on those beaches because there's nobody else there. It's just you, the bald eagles, and the waves, the driftwood, the sea stacks. It's fantastic. It's just such a beautiful place. And unlike most of America, Oregon has a similar approach to the UK. Private businesses can't own the foreshore in America. Okay. They had an enterprising governor at the turn of the 20th century who made a law that said no one can own the foreshore of the whole of this state.
Very forward thinking.
Yeah. So it's called the People's Coast. And because of this, it's very accessible. And you can get down on almost every bit of coast you could possibly want. And so you can find little hideaways, little cozy nooks that no one's no one's at, and you feel a bit like an explorer. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you do any other photography when you're over there? Do you go to visit the woods or
No?
just the coast?
Yes.
It's a lot of trees.
I have done a little bit of woodland photography. In fact, I'm very good friends with Simon Baxter, who Joe knows very well, and you know. And I've been up with Simon and been out and photographed his trees with him just for fun. And the pictures sit on my hard drive, and I look at them every now and again and think these are lovely trees. I'll leave that to Simon. He's the tree guy. And you, Joe. And you, Tim. You're the tree guys.
Well, I've only just started taking pictures again for a while. I haven't done any work for a couple of years at least. I moved up to the area in the Highlands to go and do some photography, be on the doorstep, and ended up taking up other hobbies, climbing and stuff. So
interesting.
I just need to get.
It like to it? What's it like going back to it now after 2 years?
It's good. I have the urge to move around more. I find it difficult to just stay in one spot in an area photographing for a morning. I'll go and see what's over there or what's over there. So Joe's good company because you're very much the same, I think, Joe. You need to go and see what's over that ridge.
Explore. And let's say when you came out with us the other day, you came out with an absolute cracker. So
it was good fun. That was.
Yeah, you haven't lost it.
Thank you very much. So what is happening in the future? Do you have any plans? I know you just said you're doing your rock wave meeting photography. Is there any other goals or books, or you said you might have another couple of books in you?
I would like to do a black and white book. I really love black and white, and I really would like to do. I've got one laid out in Lightroom. I go and look at it every now and then and think, do you know what, Rachel, you should really do this. So at some point I'll be emailing Eddie and saying, do you think we could do a black and white book?
There's something magical about duotone, tritone printing as well that does look fabulous.
Yeah.
Tim, if we've come to the end of the questions, I've certainly got a few for Rachel, or at least one.
We've got 10 minutes left.
Yeah. So, particularly texture, color, color, black and white maybe, but you mentioned texture, and it's something that is increasingly, I've found, an obsession. And I might be wrong, but I think the reason is that textural subject matter is kind of tactile, and that that feeling of touching and being in touch with the natural world, with the real world, is increasingly a subject that I would love to be able to do with my photography. And I just wondered, I was actually rather, I don't know, something about what you said about wanting to still get the rock sharp. I found that very encouraging, because I sort of feel that is one of the superpowers of photography, is the fine detail of the reality of the world is what makes photography powerful. Not to say that there's anything wrong with doing, in ICM, if that's what floats your boat. But for me, the reality is part of it. And I'm looking more and more at subjects which are very rich in texture, almost as if they're fabric, that kind of thing. So a woodland is the obvious subject, but then again, rocks and water too can very much be part of that. And I just wonder whether you'd had any parallel thoughts. You don't have to. It's just, it was just about, when we say we've been touched by something, I was wondering if there's something that we maybe easily miss, because photography is kind of one step removed and we don't have the physicality of paint. But isn't there still something in that? Sorry, I'm waffling here, but just wonder what your take was on that.
No, I don't think you are waffling. So we didn't go to this until now, but talking about the direction that I'm going in, I think my work is becoming more literal, which is a surprise. I didn't expect that, but it is. Yesterday, even though I'm talking about not having context in your work, I shared a picture which is just a photograph. I like top-down stuff. So it's a top-down photograph of the ground in the middle of Iceland, in the lava desert. And everyone will just say, oh, it's just a black plane. But if you actually look at it properly, look down at it, it's not. I mean, it is so textural, and it's windswept. So the wind has carved the lava into shapes, and then there are different sorts of lava. So this particular picture, it's sort of brown larval sand or dust that's been carved into windblown shapes. But then there are little pale grey grains of probably pumice dotted about all over it. And it's going to, I mean, if I were a member of a camera club and entered that in a competition, it would do badly because there's no leading lines. There's no way for the viewer to find their way through the frame. It's just amazing to me. Nature's done this, and it's, yeah, everyone will just ignore that. But actually, photography has opened my eyes to these incredible layers of texture, absolutely texture, Joe, and beauty in the world that if I weren't a photographer, I would never have noticed that. I'd probably have my eye on the mountain thinking that's a cool mountain and walk straight across this amazing texture. So I think I'm heading more towards that at the moment. The waves breaking against the rocks, they're pretty literal. I'm recording a moment and not really painting my interpretation on top of it beyond the fact that as soon as you put anything within four corners, you are interpreting it. But beyond that, I'm almost self-effacing. Does that make sense?
Nature is the art.
Yes.
And that's, I truly believe that there's a deep seam of landscape or based photography, which, allows the natural world to be the artwork. And your job, it really is almost as if you were doing artwork copying, so you tend to use high resolution equipment it's like the lens itself has to be so good that it disappears because it's just rendered the world as it is in some way. And I do love that idea of, that you're kind of honoring the simple surface of the world, and that every landscape has a story. So, the Icelandic one, of course, is volcanic, but it's full of the energy of the now as well because of the wind or maybe the wave if you're by the coast. And there are parallels elsewhere in the world. But yeah, every landscape has its surface texture, which has a story to tell. And that it's lovely hearing you describe it, because I got a lot of inspiration from that. I'm even more fired up to egg now, actually.
That's great.
Interestingly, I've been reading about Ruskin recently, and you don't really see a lot of Ruskin's artwork beyond the filtered version of the Lake District. But he has his approach to detail and texture was fascinating because he was just as interested in the small detail and textures, the end of a glacier, like carving into rock, or some moss at the side of a river. And it's just that you don't see it. And that was a very romantic view again. It's maybe not the sublime, but in many ways it has that romantic sublime about it as well, in terms of amazement at what you're seeing in those small details.
Yes, it's there, isn't that sort of sense of wonder about the reality around us is something, if you can convey that, is very magical. Just briefly, I was lucky enough to go to Leonardo da Vinci drawings exhibition about 3 years ago in Edinburgh. And although there are all these wonderful, amazing figure and portraits and horses and anatomy pictures and machines, and then towards the end of his life, he starts to become obsessed with landscapes and the details in nature, and specifically water flowing over rocks. So we're in good company, I'd like to think.
Well, that's lovely. I like that.
Yeah, and I think, again, because he was somebody who was constantly curious about the world.
Are you familiar with the American photographer Jeffrey Conley?
No.
Yes. He's an analog worker, black and white, and I've got one of his books. It's called Reverence, and I think I mean, they're hard to get, these books. They sell out really fast. But if you get one secondhand or you find one somewhere, I recommend it. And the reason I mention him is because if I could nick his title and have a book called Reverence, and it would just be these, as you put it so beautifully, Jo, honouring nature with photographs, I would love to. But he's nicked that title already. It's his. I wouldn't dream of using it.
You have to find a substitute, but you can always use it as a chapter title inside, or a title, a picture title.
Yes, yeah. But I think that is it. And I mean, I say that, yeah, you come up with things you say to clients. They can, if you say them enough, they start to sound like catchphrases. I hate the idea of that. But I do think photography is 90% seeing, and that's what we're doing with these simple reflections of nature. You know, we're seeing them, and I think that's the thing we can bring to the equation.
That's the most enjoyable thing about having the pictures afterwards, is seeing more into them that you didn't see at the time, and rediscovery after
true.
the event.
Especially if you leave them for a while.
That's true too, but especially high res. I mean, maybe it's my eyesight's not that great these days, but I always find high resolution, well-focused images are amazing. You sort of go into them and suddenly a whole world emerges that you didn't even see at the time. So yeah, it is because everything is so complex and so rich. I mean, it's literally all over the world, but I think in the UK in particular, and Scotland, I suppose, since that's where I do a lot of my favorite work. Every geological story is not a simple one. Iceland is actually, in theory, is very simple because it's so young as a country, and yet visually it's absolutely fascinating as every type of volcanology that you can imagine. And that's then so, been altered by the glaciology and, ebb and flow of the climate in that period. So yeah, there's always something to discover just through maybe a simple picture. It can just start a line of inquiry.
I agree.
Well, thank you very much, Rachel, and Jo, for co-hosting this. No, I really enjoyed that. I'll put a few links to things in the article once it comes out.
Yes, thanks, Rachael. It was absolutely fascinating and great fun to share your views of the world. That's beautifully put, many of them too. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you to the listeners or viewers, whatever you would call them, readers, I guess, for some different questions, which was lovely.